Hep sen mi ağladın? Hep sen mi yandın? Ben de gülemedim. Yalandım yağda. Sen beni görünce mutlu mu sandın?
Architecturally, Bosnia-Herzegovina is a country with the rich history, with the Romans, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarians. We looking at cities in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in particular Mostar and Sarajevo. But what do you think makes Sarajevo so different and distinct in terms of city and architecture?
Well, I can tell you that Sarajevo is a larger city in several fields. Firstly, in terms of a mixed culture, because the state in Mostar is still like a division. There's a division going on still. And you can see that spatially, but also socially. And in Sarajevo, it's not that much. You see more mixed cultures, and there's more redevelopment in Sarajevo on regional scale, but also just on city scale. For example, they are improving international flights, for example, at the airport, but also in city scale they are improving, or they are making new buildings, especially a lot of shopping malls, while in Mostar the situation of the governmental state is much more complicated, and that affects actually the development of the city itself. That's the biggest.
Speaking of the development, reading the responses from the residents of the city, many feel that the current development is covering the old and not really finding the right balance between remembering the history of the city and also keeping a balance between the two. How do you feel about this?
Well, I think the development of the city of Sarajevo is much more based on current trends. Other cities, such as Mostar, are more based on pre-war trends. So in that way, I guess Sarajevo is doing well in redevelopment for what the people are asking for. So I guess, but it's going very slow, but that has to do with these political issues, of course. So in that way, I guess that's the biggest difference between other cities and Sarajevo itself.
It's the development.
Yeah, the development.
Well, you've noticed when we walk around the city, almost every building is covered in graffiti, or there's a tag somewhere. Is graffiti something that is socially accepted here in Sarajevo?
Definitely, yeah.
It is.
Well, yeah, you have different levels of graffiti. For example, if you enter a tram, you see different styles of graffiti than on buildings that are not in use. I mean, on these buildings you can find a lot of artwork or political messages, while in the tram you can find small artwork and, for example, names or important dates.
And in terms of when the graffiti appears on the buildings, do you feel that this recreates the architecture and modernizing it, or do you see it as vandalism?
I don't see it as vandalism in this country. I see it more as an opportunity, actually, to redevelop a city, because graffiti in this context is not only sharing messages or art, but it's also it has a social meaning, and I think we have to use graffiti as a social meaning to develop the city in a social way, actually.
Do you see graffiti as vandalism?
combination, probably. Probably the south side of Chicago, where I grew up, you have very similar, beautiful things in the viaducts in the African American neighborhoods. I grew up in mixed neighborhoods, which were almost non-existent back 100 years ago when I was a lad. Very beautiful things, and some are very hateful. I mean, you have the full spectrum. I mean, you know, comparing Chicago on that, you know, Chicago is a great architectural city. Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, all kind of modern skyscrapers. Here, what's interesting for me is, and not only me, when I've been here over 40 years, when European guests come to the old Yugoslavia, gee, they would do business in Zagreb or Belgrade, but they would enjoy themselves in Sarajevo. You know, you go in the Basčaršija, the old Turkish part of town, and you start walking to Feradiya now street toward the west, and suddenly you get into Austria. You're into the end of the 19th century. You know, the Austro-Hungarian Empire took over from Ottoman here in, what, 1878. And they built the embankments on the river. We don't have floodings, you UK people. We have these huge walls that are wonderful. The hospital was built at that time, which reminds me of, I've been to Vienna, the Allgemeine Krankenhaus, which is, you know, huge. It's a whole city. So a lot of things are, and then we added on, after Austria, then we had Dragi Drug Tito, Dear Comrade Tito, in communism, and some horrendously ugly socialisticsky social buildings built right after the war for the narod, for the people. Yeah, but the people, it was kind of like living in Cabrini Green in Chicago, the ghetto kind of housing. No central heating, everyone, you know, you have 50 liters of water, no central water, very grim. Then you go still further out, you have stuff built later, kind of semi-modern buildings. Now there's some nice stuff coming up. But it's a game in play, life goes on. And Sarajevo, when I came in '69, was very isolated. It was very provincial. There was a core of people that knew the world and they knew literature and art and things, but most of the people, when they would see kids like you, they would gawk. That's the best word at them. We had a young lady was our, you know, taking care of Lejla here, and her sister, when they were young, she was 16 years old. It came from the provinces. And she would look at American hippies, say, in the early 70s, like this. Couldn't believe it. You know, you mean they're wealthy kids and they dress like that, like bums? You know, it was, they were in a different world.
Lejla, having grown up and lived in the city your whole life, the space of Sarajevo, do you think the way the city is being used as in walking around the city, has it changed much since the war?
It changed for better and for worse. There's a lot of construction, a lot of beautiful new places. We have a lot more restaurants, cafes, more nightlife, cultural life. But also the infrastructure is falling apart. We have a lot of problems. Our streets, you know, old buildings, old facades. We have a problem also with stray dogs. Maybe you didn't notice.
That was my first impression, really.
It's a really big problem because we're adopting some laws that we're not prepared to implement. So there are no shelters for these dogs, and the dogs multiplied. We used to have a lot of cats, but the dogs killed the cats, unfortunately.
Well, really, they are scary. The dogs here are really scary. I mean, I'm not afraid of dogs in general, but when I came here, I mean, the street dogs are really like... Okay.
This is just a symptom of some of these like unsolved problems, and there's also these problems like who is in charge of what part of the infrastructure. we have so many structures like counties, municipalities, cantons, federation. This is why we're having these protests as well. And nobody's in charge of anything. And so the dog problem is a symptom of that, because no one institution can solve it. It's so complicated. So this is like parts of our city, our parks are falling apart. Where we live in the old town, actually, it's right at the center of where everybody visits who comes. We're across from the National Library and near the site of this assassination where everybody walks, and then there's this beautiful little park that completely fell apart due to lack of care, the garbage, the dogs. So these are all problems. You know, mixed with this beautiful, charming, historical setting.
The cities, like the young people of the city, they have sort of taken into their own hands, and in particular we're hoping to look at a parkour group called Team Limitless, and many members of that group and visitors, other parkour people who have visited, say that Sarajevo is a playground for free runners, is a perfect space for doing such a thing. But what do you think makes it so appealing to groups like this, to subcultures that want to come and explore the city, but in a different way than its intended process?
Well, if you look at the skyline of Sarajevo, you will discover that much. You will discover a time of Ottoman history. You will discover a lot of Austro-Hungarian buildings and some new buildings, some old buildings, some ruins. So especially for the group of free runners, they have so much opportunities to discover all these phases in the city. I mean, different roofs, empty buildings, dirty buildings full of garbage. That's even interesting for these kind of groups. So I think that's why it's interesting.
You spoke of a lot of problems in terms of architecture and the space of Sarajevo, but the future, do you think in the hands of, let's say, of the young people at the moment who are really going to bring the city, build it up from the ruins almost, what do you think the future holds for them?
Tough.
Yeah, that's a tough one, really.
Tough everywhere. You know, I'm a mathematician, I do probability theory, stochastic processes. Here you are, say you're President Obama. Well, how to treat Saudi Arabia? They got all this gas and oil, we need it, you know. We can go this way, work with the Israelis, work against these, and then you make a history based on your assumptions. Or we can say we have shell oil now, the hell with them, we're going to deal with Iran and be buddy, you know, and it goes a different way. It's very hard, like the weather. It's changing every minute, and for you non-mathematicians, there's something called the butterfly effect. That if a butterfly moves its wings in South America, that affects the weather in New York the next year. What that means is that you have an iterative process. You know, if you do this, you have that, and you do this, and you do 100 iterations, and you make a mistake in the 10th decimal place of your calculations at the beginning, after 10 calculations, you have a totally different answer. So it's very complicated, right? Only looking back can you look brilliant. And I can feel with pride watching the Cold War on CNN now, what the Americans did in Europe after World War II, the Marshall Plan, etc., handling of the Soviet Union, as something brilliant. Maybe it was stupid at the time, but it worked. Now what to do with Arabs and Israelis, with Sarajevo, with a million places? Not clear.
Now that Sarajevo is rebuilding, there's a lot of money coming from different places. What's been the effect of foreign money on the identity of Sarajevo? Because it's clearly got a very distinct identity in terms of its architecture. Mm-hmm. How has that money played a role in kind of trying, because that money comes with expectations and certain conditions and ideologies attached to it coming from the source nations. Has there been, have you seen, or is there a kind of a shift in the way that the reconstruction of the city is changing the city, and maybe probably trying to make it a more Western European or more...
By entering foreigners.
Yeah, so the money that's coming in now, how is it changing? Does it have an influence on the ideology and the way that the city is being rebuilt? Or?
Well, I can't say a lot on financial level, but I can say on the people who are interested in Sarajevo and can come to Sarajevo to have a certain influence. Also from my own perspective, of course. The architecture is very interlinked with the social issue here. And if you look at the social issue, then we can say that by entering the city as foreigners, that it definitely has some influences on the architecture, especially from Turkey, but also from Western Europe in a lesser amount, but I think it will grow during time. I think that first of all, the definition of using space, for example, using public space, will change. The definition of urbanization, of regeneration, will change by having had different views of different countries and different people who are working who will work on the architectural field. So I don't know what the outcome will be. But
as a sort of a fan of Tito, what is your feeling about how the city is coming along and this, we could probably call it the westernization in essence. What's your thoughts on that?
Me being a fan of Tito, I'm a fan of some of the things I experienced, I grew up with, that were a consequence of some of his ideas, some socialist ideas, I guess. And that was the fact that just, for example, education and healthcare and other social benefits were so readily available for the population. So I think during those years, literacy jumped up, and education and even university education was freely available to anybody. Scholarships were there to bring kids from mountains and distant areas. Also the way even the army worked was built on this idea of kind of integration and brotherhood. So boys were serving the army after high school throughout the whole country, and it was deliberately mixed, where Bosnian kids were sent to Serbia or Serbian to Slovenia, and there were all these ideals that were real. Perhaps they all fell apart into shambles in the pre-war and war years, but these ideas of brotherhood and a sense of then Yugoslavia, it was real. Those ideals were real, and that kind of education, integrating everybody, mixing everybody together. We honestly did not even know of our close friends necessarily what their background was, and a lot of them had mixed background. Also the same way healthcare and other social benefits were available for the wide population. They could, there were summertime resorts and hotels for workers, so people with their families could all have vacations, and so there was more kind of social justice and equality. And also this sense that I was saying of idealism, some kind of really belief in togetherness and this idea of Yugoslavia. But then that, after Tito's demise, gradually went away, slowly being replaced by horrendous new nationalistic type of ideas. And then the war, and then we are where we are. It's so much has changed. It's a different world now completely.
What was it like being a teenager during the siege?
Actually, I was older than a teenager.
Oh,
What was it like?
And I was not here during the siege, but my family was.
Harry, you were here.
Six
So
months,
he
yeah.
can talk more about it. What I know of the siege was I was in graduate school in Michigan, and so from my point of view, things happened like overnight. During the month of March in '92, we still had normal telephone conversations, and there were hints that something was stirring, but really we were in denial. And then all of a sudden, like beginning of April, there was a phone call, or I made the phone call, where suddenly they were saying, we cannot speak, we're hiding in the basement, there's shelling. This seemed to be overnight. And then disintegrating to where we had no phone contact. And, well, the rest you can...
The rest is history.
You can describe.
But this is the fate of a small country in the middle of forces. It's always something from outside. The Romans were here. The Romans, there are Roman roads up on the mountain here. The Roman Empire, Ottoman, Austro-Hungary, communism, you know, when you're a small country, all these waves. And the genetic composition here, it's interesting. You know, the people in Tito's time were all Yugoslavs, Southern Slavs. The idea was we're Slavic, the people here are Slavic. The DNA of the people is not predominantly Slavic. It is the original people that lived here, whose genes would be close to present-day Albanians. But, you know, history, it's all fiction, you know. Who made America? Who are the great Americans, you know? Are they Obama? Are they, you know, Anglo-Saxon? God knows what's going on. The whole world, there's a huge change now, and my concern, from what Lejla said, going away from altruism and group feeling toward the ya moment, the I moment, that you only live once. And that means when I left here after 6 months of war, when it became clear Clinton will not intervene here, and I was advised by, you know, international people, you just get killed here for nothing. If you're going to die, die for something meaningful. You've done your bit here with news people and TV and all that stuff. Now go to America, make money, send it back to the people here, and try and influence the Americans to behave, you know, in a better way. Everything just, you know, keeps changing. So the concern is from the 60s, you know, the Kennedys, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We will go to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. You know, doing hard, good things. Now it's, you know, what restaurant are we going to go to eat at? You know, are we going to, the Kardashians are on, you know. To this old kind of viewpoint, what do you look like? The things, you know, got more shallow. Lejla's mother, my wife, when she came to America in '63, looked around and said, these people have never had a war on their soil here. They don't know what to do with themselves. Well, some of us still did due to our parents, but it's disappearing. You know, it has to be reborn. You know, and I hope it'll happen.
uçalım. Her dakika her anımda cennete yelken açalım. Her dakika her anımda cennete yelken açalım. İstersen git umarsız, çengel asılı yürek. Karlar erir mi harsız, sevdaya ayrılık gerek. Karlar erir mi harsız, sevdaya ayrılık gerek. İstersen gözlerimden al, damla damla hatıramda kal. Yolları yollara bırak, gidiyorsan beni de al. Yolları yollara bırak, gidiyorsan beni de